Can you tell me why this post-war institution still needs to exist in 2013?
Well, the World Bank Group has been around since after the war, and the original purpose was to rebuild Europe. But with the Marshall Plan, the World Bank started thinking about what about economic growth, what about infrastructure development in developing countries. And in the 1960s, we began to focus on poverty. Robert McNamara gave us that very strong focus. And unfortunately, there are still 20% of our population in the world living in absolute poverty. So tackling poverty, but also finding ways of building infrastructure, building healthcare systems, educational systems, providing social protection services. These are all things that are in desperate need in many countries in the world, not just the poorest, but in middle-income countries as well.
But your primary mission is what? Poverty?
Our primary mission is tackling poverty. But the related missions around it, of course, are, we need growth in the private sector. So we have a private sector arm that invests and provides loans so that the private sector can grow and create jobs. We have groups focused on health, education, social protection programs. We do the broad spectrum of things that are required to build prosperity in a society and therefore end poverty.
A lot of people would argue the world has overtaken the World Bank. That actually, if you look at the developing world, if you look at Africa, it is growth that is bringing them out of poverty, not top-down loans or central planning or that kind of thing, economic dictation from outside, as some people see it. I mean, has the world just moved on?
Well, the good news is that that top-down loans and central planning and dictation are not things that the World Bank Group does. And in fact, if you look at the developing world, so many of the things that have helped the developing countries weather the economic crisis have come from partnerships with the World Bank Group. We've helped countries in Africa, for example, establish central banks and separate them from ministries of finance. We've built electrical grids, we've built roads. So many of the things that we've done in partnership with those countries really have come from the World Bank Group. We are a very different organization today than we were 25 years ago when I myself was in Washington, D.C. protesting the World Bank for having too much of a one-size-fits-all solution.
What did you not like about the World Bank when you were protesting against it?
Well, we didn't feel at the time that the World Bank was sensitive to the need to invest in health, education, social protection programs. I mean, I think we felt that there was a kind of mood in the World Bank saying that as long as there's economic growth, everything else will fall into place. Nothing could be farther from the truth today. We're on the leading edge of tackling issues like climate change, gender equality, and we do not have one-size-fits-all solutions. And in fact, if you look at our portfolio, we're doing very different things in different parts of the world.
But if you come back to this question of whether aid works, where is your evidence that aid is better than countries just growing?
Well, I mean, if you think of aid and growth as separate, then you may be able to make that argument, but that's really a false dichotomy. So much of what the World Bank investments have done is to create the conditions for the growth today. Investing in health, education, and social protection, these are not charity programs. These are fundamental investments in human capital that every society needs to make if they're to have any chance of growth. We do so much work in the private sector, things like helping governments remove obstacles for small and medium enterprises to get established and to create jobs. Those are the kinds of things that we're working on. So it's not a dichotomy between aid and growth. In fact, we believe that very focused and smart aid has had a huge impact on the developing countries' growth that we see today. The growth in the world is being held up by growth in the developing world. Well, if you just look at the numbers, high-income countries are going to grow at about 1.2, 1.3% in the next year. Developing countries, 5.5%. The global rate's around 3%. So it's over the last 5 years, it's been growth in the developing countries that have kept up global growth. And one thing we know for sure is that if every country in the world is as competitive as it can be and it is growing, that's good for the world.
Could you give us an example of a World Bank aid program, or however you want to define it, that has enabled growth in the developing world?
Well, let me give you some very different examples. In much of Africa, we've been very involved in building electrical grids. We've been involved in ensuring that there's energy. There's nothing more important to economic growth than having energy. We're not there yet. Africa still has a huge energy deficit, but we're focused on that particular issue and we're going to continue to move on it. And there's other things all over the world, helping countries create a better business climate. Most people don't know that that's what we do, but our Doing Business report has had a huge impact throughout the world. On the other side, we have been promoting these, what the Brazilians called conditional cash transfer programs, where you give cash directly to poor people, but you condition it on things like you got to have your kids in school, your kids have to be well nourished, and mothers have to go for public health education so they're able to take care of their children. Investments in human capital, investments in infrastructure. We've been doing all of these things throughout the world.
Is there moral hazard in what you do, in giving money to poor people and poor governments?
Well, I would ask you first, define moral hazard in this particular context.
Well, if you give a poor country money, do you stop it developing the systems and means to create that wealth itself?
Everything we do is to guard against just that. You know, I think there are very few institutions in the world who have been as involved at institution building as the World Bank Group. There's a difference in what we do. We don't give money to outside groups to go in and do projects in developing countries. We work directly with governments. We work directly with private sector entrepreneurs in these developing countries. We work directly so that they can do the things that they want to do. With governments, it's really always the government's priorities that are the most important in determining the projects that we'll take forward. So we're very different in that sense. You know, we're very focused on making sure that we know where the money's going, but we give money directly to governments. We go directly with investments in the private sector. You've
announced a very dramatic sounding target to eliminate extreme poverty. What do you mean by that?
Well, so far, from 1990 to 2010, over a 20-year period, we halved global poverty. Now, you look back to 1990, and it's quite stunning to think that some 43% of the people in the world were living on less than $1.25 a day. That's awful. In a very short period of time, 20 years, one would think, we halved global poverty. But things are in a situation where we have a truly historic opportunity. The growth in the developing countries during this financial crisis is a very positive sign. We think there are a clear opportunity for more growth and even faster growth in the future. We have a chance to end poverty within a generation. That's an historic opportunity, and we feel that we've got to jump on it.
What will be the poverty that is left in the world when you've eradicated extreme poverty?
You know, the success from 1990 to 2010 had a lot to do with success in China. China lifted more people out of poverty in that period than any country has ever done in history. Now the tough cases remain, and we've got to really work hard to get to the 3%. Once we get to 3%, the nature of the battle against poverty will change. Rather than broad structural measures to spur growth, to implement programs like these cash transfer programs that protect the poorest, you'll have to really focus on very specific populations. So the nature of the battle will change. It doesn't mean at all, though, that we're going to quit. I mean, we're going to be around for a very long time, because even if people are living at $1.26 a day, that doesn't mean we're happy. The other goal that we've announced, building shared prosperity, means that anyone who is poor, whether they live on $1, $2, or even $10 a day, what we want to do is help to lift them out of vulnerability, let them join the middle class. So we really have two goals: end poverty, get it down below 3%, and then build shared prosperity so that people who are lifted out of poverty can actually join the middle class.
You've been arguing that tackling inequality is fundamental to eradicating poverty. Why? Right. I mean, why are the two things so linked? Why do you need to stop the rich getting richer, or the gap getting bigger, in order to tackle the people at the bottom?
Well, we're very focused on several things. First of all, we're not talking just about redistribution. What we're talking about is a situation in which you have economic growth. You need growth. Growth is good. The success of economies growing, creating jobs is a good thing. We believe that very strongly. But we also have a lot of evidence. What did the Arab Spring teach us, other than that if you have rapid GDP growth, which many of those countries had, but you're not including young people, you're not including women, you're building instability into your society. That's what we found. That's what the evidence suggests. So we're not just making broad proclamations about equality. What we're saying is, if you want to grow, if you want that growth to be sustainable, you've got to focus on fundamentals. You've got to get your macroeconomic policies right, but it's got to be inclusive. You've got to ensure that young people, women, marginalized groups are participating in that economic growth.
But although surely the lesson of the Arab Spring was about political inclusivity as well,
absolutely,
rather than economic.
Well,
so are you saying that becomes
actually
inequality is about political inequality as well, not just economic?
We're not a political organization. You know, we work very closely with our partners in the UN system who are much more focused on the politics. For us, what we saw was that young people couldn't find jobs. These were college-educated young people who were going out into the job market and couldn't find jobs. In Tunisia, of course, which started the Arab Spring, when I visited, I was really surprised to learn that the highest rates of unemployment are among college-educated young people. That suggests that there are many things that are wrong. You know, there were great suspicions about the fairness of the private sector back in the days of the previous ruler, but also what kind of education did they receive so that they now have the highest rates of unemployment. There are so many things to tackle in that area, but what we know is that the lack of inclusion builds instability. Inclusiveness is a survival strategy, should be a survival strategy for every country in the world.
You probably are aware that there's a big debate going on in this country about aid and what the responsibility is of a country like ours towards the developing world. If you take Pakistan as an example, people are saying, why should a country like ours be giving money to Pakistan when Pakistanis aren't paying tax?
Well, I just read that briefly in the morning newspapers. Let me talk generally, though, about how important aid is. And first of all, let me just congratulate Prime Minister Cameron and his government for meeting the pledge on April 1st of 0.7% of GDP. Here's what I would say. You know, aid has been effective. We have halved the rate of poverty. There's just been so many tremendous developments that have happened as a result of the kind of aid that we put in.
But can you claim that? When you say we've halved it, that's not aid, was it? That was growth as well as aid. I mean, dynamic growth.
What I've been trying to say is that the growth, especially in the developing countries, has been tied to so many of the things that we've done to put the groundwork in place for growth. Let me just give you some examples. You know, there was a time when we thought, you know, AIDS in Africa, something I know well. AIDS in Africa, oh my gosh, 30 million are infected, there's just nothing we can do. But we stepped up, the UK stepped up, many countries in the world stepped up, and now there are 8 million people in HIV treatment. And let me give you specifically what the implications are. If nobody was on treatment, if those 8 million people had been dead, if nobody knew their HIV status and we hadn't jumped in, what would have been the prospects for economic growth in Africa? I would argue that they would have been much, much lower. So there are things that we do with aid that you don't see the immediate connection with growth, but they are there. I've been in this business for most of my adult life, and there have been many, many criticisms of aid, and there's no question we can get better. At the World Bank Group, we're working very hard to improve the way we do our business, to be less bureaucratic, to be more agile. There are things that we can do to get better, but I have experienced it through my bones. I have seen situations that were written off as hopeless, but with aid, countries have flourished. Let me give you another very specific example.
What about the responsibility? I mean,
all right, but yeah, very specific. You know, in Korea, right? Korea was thought of as a complete basket case in the 60s and 70s. Impossible. No way that country is going to grow ever. But there was lots of World Bank assistance. The U.S. government provided a lot of assistance. And in those early days, it was critical to have the assistance that Korea did. Now, they've been doing very, very well and haven't been receiving assistance for a long time, but even when they had a crisis in 1997, the World Bank went back in. So there is a role for organizations like us, and I think it's a critical role, and I congratulate the UK government for taking such courageous and bold action. My only hope is that the UK will inspire many other governments to step up as well.
But what about the responsibility of the recipients, of the Pakistanis to say, yes, we will sort out our tax system, of other recipients to improve their systems?
Well, this is a complicated and long-standing historical issue between the UK and Pakistan.
That's just an example.
And I won't comment on it.
Yeah.
But here's what I would say. The responsibility for development at the end of the day is always with the governments. And this is why we work in the way that we do. We make loans to governments. Sometimes with the poorest countries we give grants. But in every single case, we work with them so that they ultimately take responsibility for the program. That's the way we do our work at the World Bank Group, and we think it's the best way to do it.
Doesn't that let them off the hook? Doesn't that say, well, you know, if you get into real trouble, the money will still be there because we're not going to let you starve? That is the sort of the aid dilemma, isn't it?
Well, let me put it this way. not letting millions of people starve to death, not forgetting a country after an earthquake has destroyed all of its infrastructure, I think that's a good thing. I think that's one of the best things about modern society. The fact that we feel connected to each other, it's a good thing. And moreover, if you look at places like the Sahel, if you look at places like the Great Lakes region, having stability in those areas is of interest to everyone. I mean, we knew what happened in northern Mali. We're working right now to try to come up with a joint solution across all the multilateral institutions and the bilateral aid organizations. We've got to find great solutions for the Sahel that are political, security, and economically oriented. I'm traveling next month with the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to the Great Lakes region. The situation in the Congo and on the border area of Eastern Congo, this is something that should concern everybody in the world. We do not need failed, fragile states in those areas or anywhere else. Look at the Middle East and North Africa. We are very involved. I just returned from Afghanistan, and as the troops pull out of Afghanistan, the World Bank is going to be there trying to build businesses, trying to provide health, education, and social protection along with the government. Who else would do that if we didn't have organizations like the World Bank Group and aid to help us? We are a very connected world. I mean, what have we learned from the disasters of the past, from 9/11 to the tsunamis? We are a very interconnected world. And if we didn't have aid, I shudder to think what the world would look like.
What is the responsibility of the World Bank when it comes to making sure the world has a future, if you like, in terms of climate change?
You know, when I became president of the World Bank Group, one of the first things I did was to begin studying what the global response to climate change looked like. You know, we're involved in energy, we're involved in markets, and eventually we need a carbon market. We're involved in agriculture, we're involved in the building of cities. These are 4 areas that are critical to the response to climate change. Because we were involved in all those areas, I started asking questions. Well, how bad could it be? And the lessons that I learned were shocking to me. You know, one of the estimates are that if we go on the very worst path, the very highest emission path, we could be at 3 degrees Celsius or 4 degrees Celsius even by 2060 or 2070. I have a 4-year-old son. That would mean that when he's my age, he would be living in a world that would be unrecognizable to us today. So this is very, very real. This is not about your great-great-great-grandchildren. This is about our children. This is about our grandchildren. This is about what kind of world we're going to leave them.
But does that mean you funding projects or making...
We have to do a number of things.
Mitigation, the condition of future loans or
well,
what?
you know, let me just, you know, one of the things we do, we have something called, we have a whole area of work called disaster risk mitigation. So when disasters happen, we provide insurance so that people can have ready access to cash to respond to disasters. That's a very rapidly growing part of our portfolio because the number of disasters in the world are going up. If you doubt the impact of climate change, just go talk to President Aquino in the Philippines. Areas in the Philippines that were once drought-stricken are now flooded. Areas that had monsoons at one time are now drought-stricken. Climate change for the island countries has been very real for quite some time. You know, the year in which we're supposed to reach our peak CO2 emissions, if we're to keep our warming below 2 degrees, is 2016. We're nowhere near that. So as a human being, as a father, fundamentally, for me, tackling climate change is about family values. How much do we care about our children and our grandchildren? Because if we do, we're going to have to take very rapid action. And one of the things we've been saying is that our plans, our strategy hasn't been bold enough. Every time there's an extreme weather event, people sort of look at us and say, so what's the plan? And everything we've been putting on the table so far, I think, has been too small. We have to have solutions that are equal to the challenge. So for us, it's finding a way to create stable, functioning carbon markets, carbon taxes. There are many ways of going about it, but we need that. We've got to tackle the way we build megacities. The megacities are responsible for 2/3 of the carbon emissions. We've got to find a way to build cleaner cities. Fossil fuel subsidies. You know, one of the things we do is we're really good at looking at the impact of public sector expenditures on actually making a situation better, on actually helping the poor. We know that fossil fuel subsidies are more regressive than they are progressive. There are so many exciting things we can do in the area of climate smart agriculture that have already been proven in parts of the world. We're not scaling them up. So we're gonna lead on this issue because it's just a critical one. There's no excuse for us because we actually work in those areas that are most critical to tackling climate change.
Has China already overtaken the World Bank? I mean, is it already doing more than you are?
Well, China is an extremely important partner for us. You know, I just was there and I met with Premier Li Keqiang. And with the Premier's support, we wrote a report a year ago called China 2030. And it was extremely bold and was written with the Chinese government. And it said things like China, his growth has to be more focused on consumption now. There has to be more competition for the state-owned enterprises. There were visions there that would have seemed completely radical even 5 or 10 years ago. And we did that with the Chinese government. When I went there, the minute I sat down, the Premier said, we want to work with you on the next project, and that's going to be urbanization. We need to transform the way we build cities. We want your help. We want to work with you. So China sees us as a very important partner, and we will continue to work with them. China's had a huge impact in every part of the world. We feel very fortunate that they still see us as an important partner.
And finally, I just want to ask you, I mean, you raised Korea yourself, and obviously you have Korean origins. I just wonder how you see the current situation in Korea. Because obviously there's a huge aid and poverty challenge in North Korea, but there's also a big geopolitical crisis going on right now.
You know, this is a very personal issue for me. Both my mother and father are originally from North Korea. My father escaped from the north when he was 17, crossed the border at night because he knew a border guard, and left his entire family. So I have family members. I have uncles and aunts and cousins living in North Korea that I've not had contact with ever. So it's very real for me. I'd just like to make a couple of quick points. One is that this is one people. And the fact that this is one people is embodied in me. I mean, I was born in South Korea. I grew up the first 5 years there. I have many, many friends and family in South Korea, but also in North Korea. I would just say this. I think that we've gone too far now, and I think the North Koreans have to take a step back and just think about the implications of what they're doing and try to find a path toward meaningful, reasonable engagement with the rest of the world. We need the North Koreans to do this. I think every day about the possibility that my cousins and uncles and aunts may be facing starvation. I think every day about the fact that epidemic diseases are out of control in North Korea. North Korea needs to engage with the rest of the world. They need to ratchet down their rhetoric. We need to find a path toward peaceful resolution of this problem. My very good friend and the leader of all of us, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, I think has been very clear about this, and we will follow his lead in terms of trying to find a peaceful resolution. And on a very personal level, we are waiting to see if there would be any opportunity for organizations like the World Bank Group to go in and help. They're not a member of the World Bank Group right now, and given the current situation, it's impossible. But it doesn't take away from the fact that people, possibly and probably my own family members, are suffering greatly in that country.
Dr. Kim, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to meet you.